Welcome to the Business of E-commerce podcast, the next episode, and we are back with Dale Harrison. I think over the last couple of weeks we talked. We had done two other episodes about Google ad campaigns and the costly mistakes you can make. So this is going to be part three. So just as a recap, in part one, I think we talked a lot about ad fraud bots, and if you don't pay very close attention to it, how you can burn a lot of money through that. And we talked about like geographic targeting and then how Google makes it almost impossible to get good control on it. And then part two, we talked about keywords and how to choose your keyword list to what's the best strategy to choose your keyword list. If you want to find those old episodes, you can go to our YouTube channel. There's a link on my LinkedIn profile. But today we are doing part three, and in part three we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is bidding and setting the budget. And here again, if you're not careful, this is going to be, it's almost like taking piles of $100 bills and just setting it on fire. So Dale, like what has been your experience on setting the bidding and automatic bidding? And let's just talk about all of that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that Google goes out of their way to do is to be as helpful as possible in taking work off of you. And so they offer all sorts of mechanisms to let them decide what keywords, let them decide, what type of audiences you're going to target, and of course to let them decide how to bid on, how to bid your ads. And the thing is that um, Google's entire self-interest is in maximizing the amount of money they extract from you as quickly as possible. They have no self-interest around making sure that you get good value for that money. And so as a general rule, the more, and this is across the board, not just for
Hmm.
bidding, but the more leeway you give to Google, the worse your outcomes are going to be in terms of the cost per lead, cost per conversion that you're going to get from those Google ads. And uh, and a lot of this goes back as well to how you choose keywords, for instance, because if you're choosing a small set of keywords that are identical to what all your competitors are choosing, now you're automatically everybody's bidding everybody else up. Um,
Hmm.
so, the first thing is to, choose keywords that have low competition. And, uh, because as long as you can get the traffic that you're looking for, and again, a lot of these low competition keywords are going to be low volume keywords, which means you're going to need more keywords to stack the volume. So instead of running a campaign with 20 keywords or 50 keywords, what I will often do is run campaigns with 5,000, 10,000, even as much as 100 or 120,000 keywords on a single campaign. Many of these are very long tail. No one keyword contributes, significantly large volume, but as long as they're well targeted, what you can count on is that you're catching your targeted audience in lots of different places, largely where other people aren't already there competing against you. And so I
Hmm.
think that's probably the single most important thing to keep in mind when trying to manage the budgets and the spend on Google ad campaigns is competition is not your friend. You do not want to be,
Yeah, yeah.
beating your brains out, like, you and your competitors all beating each other's brains out over bidding on the same keyword.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think in part two, we spent a lot of time talking about how if you go to a typical agency that runs Google Ads for you, their first instinct is to just find all the keywords that your competitor is bidding on, and then you're just going to bid for the same. It's a losing battle. The only one who wins in this is Google because they make a lot of money, right? So that's why I really like this idea of like, don't choose your own battlefield. Don't go into the same fight with all the competitors, but go around and you'll find a lot of opportunities. So there are like a lot of long tail keywords. The volume may be less per keyword, but if you add it all up, you're still getting like good exposure that, and you're fighting. You're in the battlefield where the competitors are not really fighting that with you, right?
Right, right. And so the other thing in here is to um you know s- and again, this is just my own experience with it, is basically ignore any recommendations that Google gives you about how you should spend the money, whether it's budget or bidding limits, because again, their interest is in maximizing the amount of money they extract from you, not in that money being spent efficiently. And so, um, I mean, pay attention to because they give you all sorts of recommendations while a campaign's running. So pay attention to the recommendations, look at it, but think very deeply about what you're doing and whether or not this really makes sense for you before you start to expand your budget or expand your bid limits. So generally what I'll do on an initial campaign, because one of the problems when you first start a new campaign is you really don't have enough information to know what's going to work or not work. You don't know which keywords are going to be working for you, and you don't know what ad copy is going to be working for you. And so, one of the things that you're at risk of in the early stage of a new campaign are what I call runaways, where, for instance, you're bidding on a keyword. And I'll give you a very, very arcane example. There's a very famous conference in biotech called the Clinical Virology Symposium. That is, a really good thing, a good conference to be able to target campaigns on, because it's large and has a high concentration of a very particular type of buyer there. The problem is nobody calls it that. They call it the CVS. Mm-hmm. And so, if you run campaigns based on what people call the conference, what you're going to get is very, very expensive ads where you're competing against the pharmacy chain. You're not targeting the conference. And so, one of the things, and a lot of times you don't know this until you run the campaigns and you see some runaway keyword, and then you start to research the keyword and you realize this has a completely different meaning in a different context, and it's showing up in front of people who are not who I thought they were. So one of the things I always worry about in the early stages of a campaign are runaways. And the best way to do that is to have hard per click bid limits and hard per day budget limits. Because even if you get a runaway, the amount of damage that it can do is relatively contained, and you can then either put in negative keywords or you can exclude those keywords. There are ways to fix it, but you don't want to fix it after you've dropped $5,000. Those are painful lessons. So, the first thing is always start low and go up, and the other thing about the Google algorithm that I've seen over the years is that if you start too high and you try to say you come in at a $10 or a $20 bid limit, but you could have gotten most of that traffic at $4. If you try to bring that bid limit down to $4, Google will punish you severely. They will essentially just quit showing your ad. But Google always loves it when you push the bid limits up. They'll always kind of expand who they'll show it to if you're pushing your bid limits up. So, a general rule is start extremely low and extremely conservative. And usually, like the day one out of the gate for a brand new campaign, I will do as low as $1 or $2 a click bid limit, with as little as $10 or $20 a day for a particular ad group. And because I'm just testing the waters, because I don't have enough information at that point to know how to bid. And so if you overbid, you run the risk of the runaways, you run the risk of realizing that you could lower your bid limits, at which point Google will punish you for it. And so you're always better to start low and then build up once you have enough information to know what you should be bidding on.
So when you create these ad groups, right, you said an example of, like, let's say you have 10,000 keywords. Are you creating like several different ad groups? Because I think the total, the daily limit is controlled at an ad group level, right? And then the max bid is controlled at is it at the keyword level?
Well, I think you can control it at different levels.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, generally I'm setting the limits at the ad group level.
Okay.
I think the budget limit, the total daily budget limit, is at the campaign level.
Oh, it's at the campaign level. Okay.
Uh, but again, I mean, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got a kind of a hard upper limit on what your total financial exposure is per day, per week, especially when you're starting out without having, the amount of information that you'll have once you start to get feedback from the campaign.
Okay.
So always start low and plan on raising those limits. Don't start high and figure that you can lower the limits later, because it will become painful if you try to do that.
Okay. So it sounds like your strategy is that, okay, you have a lot of keywords and you started very low, but then I assume you're going to prune those keywords. Wherever you're getting visibility, that's when you kind of reduce it over time, iteratively optimize and start focusing your spend on keywords that are working. Is that right?
Right. Well, and also keywords the other thing that you'll see, especially if you use the expanded audience network, so essentially the AdSense network, where your ads are appearing on third-party sites, you're going to start to pull a lot of bot traffic. And so, the other thing that you just don't know going in is, where am I spending money to attract bots versus where am I spending money to attract humans? And so this is a really important part of budget management, is to be able to have a good tracker, something like the Foo Analytics ad fraud bot tracker, sitting there on your landing pages, so that you can track exactly which keywords are seem to be attracting an unusually high level of bots, and then prune those keywords away to make the bot traffic go down or reduce.
That makes sense, yeah.
Because again, you can have what looks like a really high performing keyword in terms of, we have a very high click-through rate, maybe even at a good cost per click. But if you don't know what fraction, if 90% of that are ad fraud bots, which entirely can happen in a Google ad campaign, then your actual cost per click for a human is 10 times. If 90% are ad fraud bots, your effective cost per click is 10 times greater than what you think it is. And so again, it's a key thing is knowing where you're spending your money.
Yeah. So it looks like you need to really be in the weeds because you're getting clicks. What goes in. So you have to, if you don't pay attention, it's just going to like burn all your cash for a particular keyword, which may not even be the right keyword for you, right?
So the other thing to keep in mind is an interesting trick that Google pulls. So you have the ability to set a per day limit. So let's say it's $100 a day. When you set, when you tell Google, I want to limit my budget to $100 a day, that doesn't actually mean $100 a day. They could spend up to $3,000 in a day and still tell you that they're respecting your $100 day limit, because what they're doing is they will take your daily limit, extend it out to a month, and then treat that as the budget limit.
And then they will for that 30-day period. Okay.
That's right. It. And then they will attempt to spend that full month's worth of budget as fast as possible. And if they can figure out how to spend it in 3 days, they'll spend it all in 3 days, and then they'll turn your ads off.
So how do you control that then? If you're setting daily limit, so let's say the example is like you've set $100 daily limit. How do you prevent them from spending $3,000 on day one? Is it through the bid limit per ad? Is that how you're controlling it?
No. Because again, if they can find a way to spend the total budget, they will. And usually it's not going to be in a day, but I have seen a month's worth of budget burn through in 4 or 5 days.
Okay.
Because there's usually some constraints just in terms of the total number of ads they can place and the total number of clicks they can attract. But what can happen is they can burn a lot of budget very quickly if you're not careful. And the way to control that is to basically do not have open-ended campaigns. Now, again, when you first set a campaign up, Google's default is for there to be, they don't even show you the end date to put in it. They don't even show you the field to put in the end date. You have to find that field and open it up in order to place an end date. So when I'm running campaigns, what I'm typically doing are in the early days 5-day sprints. Later on, I'll push that out to 7 to 10-day sprints. Once I'm confident that things aren't running away. But if the entire length of the campaign is around a week, Google seems to relatively well respect the per day limits. Now, the other thing they'll do is if you have a slow day. So let's say, your customers are typically not searching on the weekends. And so, if you've got a, say $100 a day limit, but you're only getting $50 worth of clicks on Saturday and Sunday, you're essentially down $100. So Monday, they may well do $200 worth of clicks. Because what they'll do is they will try to make up for lost time from the slow days. And so again, you really have to watch what Google is charging you on a day-by-day basis to understand these effects. So so for instance, if you've got significantly different volumes on weekends versus weekdays, which happens in some cases, and you really want to hold to that bid limit, then one of the things you can do is to run two parallel campaigns, one that's only active on the weekends and one that's only active during the week. So there are ways to work around this, but if you don't understand what Google is trying to do to you in terms of burning through your budget, then you don't know what to even look for. And a lot of people will completely miss this because they're not very, very closely examining it. Now, alternatively, if you really want to spend, $1,000 a week, for instance, and you have high days and slow days, then Google will help you, make up for the slow days by having extra spend on days where they can find more volume for you, and still be able to hit that overall target for the time period that you specify. But a general rule is never leave an open-ended campaign, because that's just an open door for Google to pick your wallet.
Okay, so weekly, the end date 1 week away is what you're choosing, right? Instead of like even choosing on a monthly increments. That makes sense. There are a couple of questions in the comments. Do you want to look at those? I think the first one is, how do you manage 100,000 keywords? Do you use some automated system via black box based on algorithms? So what is your process there? On if you have like, let's say 10,000 keywords or like 50,000 keywords, are you doing this all in spreadsheets?
Yeah. Well, or access something like an access database, a relational database. So what I'm generally doing is I'll take a campaign through a set of phases, and I'll start with a relatively small, meaning 500 to 1,000 keywords that for the first phase of the campaign. And the idea is, this is my best guess as to what a large keyword set looks like. And so this is going to come from basically scraping the company's website, all of your main competitors' websites, as well as analyzing data with a tool like SEMrush or Ahrefs that allow you to see what's actually generating traffic to your competitor sites and to your site, both organic and paid. And that will usually give you a fairly large, easily 1,000, sometimes 2,000 keyword starter set. Now, a lot of these keywords are long tail, so they're not going to, a lot of these you won't see a click, in a whole month or even in a whole quarter. And then some of these keywords are going to be much more effective than other keywords. So the idea is to then take the starter set, run it for a certain period of time. And so generally what I like to see is about 100,000 impressions. And then start to see what keywords are actually getting impressions, because that tells me what people are actually searching for. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, if it's an obscure keyword that only gets searched once every 3 months, you're going to have very low impressions in that first month or
Right.
so.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the keywords that are actually getting traffic? That people are actually searching for. And then of those keywords, which ones are actually producing click-throughs? So
Mm-hmm.
which ones seem to be tied to a level of intent sufficient to get someone onto your landing page.
Mm-hmm.
Then in phase 2, what I'll do is I'll take basically the winners, and so out of maybe a starter set of 1,000 keywords, there may be 150 or 200 that are really the outstanding performers.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take those, plug that into a tool like SEMrush, and be able to then find. I'll throw one other thing out here, is that I'm not doing broad search.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
not doing phrase search. I'm doing exact search keywords.
yeah.
So,
But then you are broadening that using SEMrush so that you have complete
right,
control on it instead of letting Google
yeah,
choose the, yeah,
right.
makes
And so
sense.
I'm doing the broadening. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
take maybe the 200 that are the top performers from the first phase of the campaign. I'll plug that into a variety of different tools. SEMrush is kind of always my starting point. I'll plug that into a tool like SEMrush, and I'll let SEMrush broaden those keywords for me, so that 250 I might be able to broaden into 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And these again are all exact search keywords. But the advantage here is that I can look to see what SEMrush shows as the total traffic and the total impression traffic and the total click traffic on those keywords, so I can get a sense of what is which ones of these make sense to sort of put into that second set. Um, and then generally what I'll do is another round of 100,000 or so impressions, and then reanalyze again. And
Mm-hmm.
and the other thing that I'm also doing in here is I'm analyzing the um, all of the individual words in the ad copy. So I'll have
Mm-hmm.
lots and lots of so on a campaign like this, I may have 20 or 50 separate ads
Mm-hmm.
that that each have multiple components that are in rotation. And and so what I'm doing is I'm analyzing uh, which phrases within the ad copy are disproportionately generating clicks, as well as what the underlying keywords, because the phrases in the ad copy um, open up the door for new
Right.
opportunities. So for instance, in one specific example is kind of the discovery that when we use the word authorized or certified in the
Mm-hmm.
ad copy, so you're author, you're a say Amazon authorized or Shopify
Mm-hmm.
certified or something.
Yeah.
That tended to produce that ad copy produced much higher click-through rates, which meant that we
Mm.
could take those phrases, say Amazon authorized or Shopify certified or something, and then start to build out keyword list from the language that we had in the ad copy. So
Mm-hmm.
you're getting a lot of pieces of feedback about how people
Yeah.
are interacting with language from these ads, and then you can use these to expand out. And then the other thing is to then cross-reference all of this against the ad fraud traffic data,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because what you want to do is, because what you find is that certain keywords tend to disproportionately attract bots, but
Mm-hmm.
even within those keywords, certain ad copy will disproportionately track the bots. So the bots are not
Mm.
just putting in keywords, but they're reading your ads, and they're making
Mm.
choices about which ad to click on based on what your ad is saying. And
Mm.
and so you can do a lot to suppress the bot traffic by knowing what these individual phrases are that seem to be particularly
Yeah.
attractive to the bots.
So it looks like there is no black box tool that does it, right? You basically are doing everything using raw data, and you have built your own systems using spreadsheets and Access database, basically raw SQL it, and that's the best way. In most of these examples, I think like, yeah, I'm not aware of like any specific tool that can
Yeah.
do analyze data at this level. And you also need to marry that with like your ad fraud data from Foo Analytics, maybe even marry it with like SEMrush search data and I don't know, maybe using Google Console and then GA data, all of this. So there's no So you have to do all of this in spreadsheets. We have one more question which says, when do you start using smart bidding strategies?
Never, never, ever,
Okay.
ever.
Yeah,
Because
because you want
again,
complete control on it, right? You need to, yeah,
it's only smart, in terms of expanding Google's pocketbook. It is not
right.
smart in terms of how it's using your money. You never ever use smart bidding. And
Yeah.
and to go beyond this, I mean, Google has the ultimate lazy man's kit called PMax, where
Mm.
Google basically says, "We'll decide everything for you."
Yeah.
Um, and so you are really just, handing all the chickens over to the fox.
Yeah.
And you should not be surprised when, the fox eats all the chickens.
Right.
So, one of the things I never ever touch is PMAX. And I've experimented with it and I've watched
Mm.
how it performs. And, you know, Google is Google will place your ads on sites that will disproportionately attract fraud bots. It is not uncommon to see a mature PMAX campaign pulling 90% fraud bot traffic.
Mm.
Um, and it's hard to find a PMAX campaign that's pulling less than 50% fraud bot traffic, because the Google algorithms behind PMAX are looking at landing page and site engagement, and the bots know that. And so the bots are designed to look more like a human, an interested human, than the most interested human you'll ever find. And
Mm.
so the bots are actively deceiving the algorithm to disproportionately attract more ad placements to the fraud bot sites than to legitimate sites. And
Mhm.
then, the other thing is that, with PMAX, you're handing over your pocketbook to Google. They're getting to decide, how to optimize your bidding, not for performance, but to absolutely maximize Google's take out of your budget.
Mhm.
And so the deal is that use your brain. You there's not a black box AI solution that
Mhm.
is, there's not even a third party black box AI solution. You're going to have to think through this and to use your brain, and to not just hand over the keys to the car to
Yeah.
Google.
Yeah, which I think there's another point we talked about in an earlier episode. If you're using an agency, which a lot of my audience and are using agencies, if the contract is structured so that they get a percentage of spend, that's again like a bad way of structuring it, because they're not really, it's not about performance, it's about how much money that you spend, which is kind of in line with what
Right.
Google ultimately wants you to do. So you got to be very careful. I think we ran out of time again today. Um, I'll talk to Dale separately and see if maybe there are like more topics around this we can schedule another episode about. But that's all we have for today. As a plug for Ordoro, so Ordoro is a shipping and inventory management software for e-commerce brands. We typically work with several small to medium-sized e-commerce brands. We have a lot of customers, a lot of brands selling through Shopify, through Amazon. So if you fit that profile, definitely take a look at us at ordoro.com. We may be a good answer for your shipping, order management, inventory management flows. So thank you again for watching. Stay tuned on this on my LinkedIn page. I'll be announcing soon about what the next week's episode is about. Thank you.
Thanks.